In late 219 BCE, Hannibal laid siege to Saguntum, employing a combination of traditional siege techniques and psychological warfare. The siege lasted 8 months, a testament to the resilience of the city's defenders, but ultimately Saguntum fell. Polybius and Livy describe the aftermath as brutal. The Carthaginian forces razed the city, executing leaders and dispersing survivors. For Rome, the fall of Saguntum was intolerable. Though geographically distant, the attack on a Roman ally was interpreted as a direct threat to Rome's authority and an affront to its honor. In 218 BCE, the Roman Senate formally declared war on Carthage, setting the Mediterranean on a collision course with one of the bloodiest conflicts of the ancient world. Hannibal, at the age of 26, now commanded an army capable of challenging Rome. His forces were diverse, comprising Iberians, Numidians, Gauls, and mercenaries drawn from across the Carthaginian sphere of influence. This diversity, while a source of strength in terms of manpower and tactical flexibility, also presented challenges in discipline and cohesion. Hannibal's genius lay in his ability to unite these disparate elements into a formidable and disciplined fighting force. His leadership emphasized loyalty, rigorous training, and the careful cultivation of morale. According to Livy, Hannibal's personal charisma and strategic acumen were instrumental in maintaining cohesion among troops who hailed from many different cultures, languages, and martial traditions. The political landscape in Rome at the onset of war was complex and tense. The Roman Republic had experienced immense losses during the First Punic War and subsequent conflicts in Sicily and Sardinia. While Rome's army was renowned for its discipline and resilience, the Republic faced internal strains, including the financial burden of war and the need to maintain alliances with various Italian states. The Senate, keenly aware of Hannibal's reputation and the audacity of his campaigns, had to prepare for a war unlike any it had faced before. Roman strategists debated the appropriate response, whether to confront Hannibal directly on the battlefield or to adopt a more cautious strategy of attrition. The seeds of these strategic debates, which would later influence the campaigns of Fabius Maximus and others, were sown in this prelude period. Meanwhile, Carthage itself was not monolithic in its support for Hannibal. While the Barcid family held significant sway in Hispania, there were factions within the Carthaginian Senate wary of the risks of open conflict with Rome. The decision to support Hannibal's campaign was not unanimous, and internal politics would continue to affect Carthage's strategic options throughout the war. Nonetheless, Hannibal's reputation, combined with his early successes, ensured that he had the resources and authority to pursue his audacious plan to march into Italy, break Roman alliances, and force the Republic to its knees. The Mediterranean theater at this time was a network of shifting alliances and regional powers. Rome's influence extended across central Italy, while Carthage controlled much of southern Hispania and coastal settlements in North Africa. Smaller powers, such as the Numidian kingdoms in North Africa and various Gallic tribes in northern Italy, held the balance between the two superpowers. Hannibal understood that success depended not only on defeating Roman armies in open battle, but also on fracturing Rome's network of allies. His strategy would combine military brilliance with psychological and political maneuvering, aiming to encourage defections and exploit local resentments against Roman hegemony. In examining the start of war, it is also essential to recognize the cultural and military contrasts between Rome and Carthage. Rome's military system relied on citizen soldiers, disciplined legions trained to operate in cohesion, and a political system that emphasized collective decision-making and accountability. Carthage, by contrast, relied heavily on mercenaries and professional soldiers, supplemented by allied contingents. This created a dynamic in which Carthage could field highly skilled and diverse forces, but the loyalty and integration of these forces required exceptional leadership that Hannibal possessed in abundance. The coming conflict would test these differences, as Rome's institutional resilience faced Hannibal's tactical ingenuity. Finally, the road to the war must be understood as a period in which strategy, diplomacy, and personal ambition converged. Hannibal's oath against Rome, his consolidation of power in Hispania, and the fall of Saguntum were not isolated events. They were the culmination of decades of tension, competition, and unresolved conflict between two civilizations destined for confrontation. The Roman declaration of war in 218 BCE did not merely mark the start of a military campaign. It signaled the opening of a saga in which empires, armies, and individuals would be tested to their limits. The stage was set, the pieces were in place, and the Mediterranean world braced for a war whose scale, audacity, and consequences would resonate for centuries. After the fall of Saguntum in 219 BCE and the formal declaration of war by Rome in early 218 BCE, Hannibal Barca faced the daunting task of bringing the fight directly to the heart of the Roman Republic. His strategy was audacious and unprecedented. Rather than waiting for Rome to strike Carthage's holdings in Hispania or Africa, he planned to carry the war across hundreds of miles of hostile territory over mountains and rivers, ultimately striking within the Italian peninsula itself. This approach required not only extraordinary logistical planning, but also the unwavering loyalty of a diverse army composed of Iberians, Gauls, Numidians, and seasoned mercenaries, all of whom would need to endure a journey through terrain that was both physically challenging and politically treacherous. The early stages of Hannibal's campaign in Hispania focused on consolidating Carthaginian power and securing reinforcements. In early 218 BCE, Hannibal moved to subdue the independent tribes of northeastern Hispania, including the Ilergetes, the Indigetes, and the Occitani. These tribes had been autonomous but increasingly threatened by Roman influence through allies such as Saguntum. Hannibal's strategy was both military and diplomatic. He demonstrated force through well-organized campaigns and simultaneously offered incentives for tribes to ally with Carthage, promising protection, trade advantages, and military support. By early spring of 218 BCE, Hannibal had secured the loyalty or submission of most of the tribes in northeastern Hispania, gaining access to local levies, horses, and logistical support critical for the campaign ahead. Hannibal's army at this stage numbered approximately 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and a contingent of war elephants, likely numbering between 37 and 50. These elephants, symbols of Carthaginian power and instruments of psychological warfare, would play a crucial role in his plan to strike fear into Roman and allied forces. The army's composition reflected the diversity of the Carthaginian military system. Iberians and Gauls provided fierce and adaptable infantry. Numidian cavalry offered unparalleled mobility. Mercenaries brought specialized skills, and Hannibal himself provided the cohesive leadership needed to unify these disparate elements into a disciplined force capable of executing complex maneuvers. Once his position in Hispania was secure, Hannibal faced the most formidable logistical challenge of the campaign: crossing the Alps to enter Italy. Polybius and Livy provide detailed accounts of this extraordinary journey, emphasizing both the natural obstacles and the human toll. The plan involved moving through treacherous mountain passes, often narrow and icy, with high altitudes, unpredictable weather, and cliffs threatening both men and animals. Hannibal anticipated the difficulties but relied on his leadership and meticulous preparation to mitigate losses. Supplies were carefully rationed, guides from local tribes were recruited, and scouts were sent ahead to identify viable routes. Despite these efforts, the army suffered significant attrition, losing thousands of soldiers, many elephants, and countless horses along the way. The crossing began in late spring 218 BCE, with Hannibal moving his army through the Pyrenees into Gaul and then eastward toward the Alpine passes. Along the way, he encountered resistance from Gallic tribes who initially sought to defend their territory. Hannibal, skilled in both diplomacy and intimidation, employed a combination of military action and negotiation to pacify these tribes, ensuring his army could continue its march. His understanding of terrain, local politics, and the morale of his troops was central to maintaining cohesion during this arduous journey. Reaching the Alps by midsummer 218 BCE, Hannibal's forces confronted some of the most formidable natural defenses in the ancient world. The passes were narrow, and the weather was severe, with snow still lingering at higher elevations. Slopes were slippery, avalanches threatened the army, and supply lines were stretched dangerously thin. Hannibal deployed his troops with careful attention to order and protection. Infantry cleared the path, elephants were guided along the flanks to prevent panic, and cavalry units were positioned to guard against ambushes. At several points, the army faced direct attacks from Alpine tribes attempting to repel the Carthaginian advance. Hannibal's tactical skill was evident in his ability to repel these attacks while maintaining the momentum of the march. During this period, Hannibal continued to exploit political fissures within Italy. By demonstrating both military prowess and tactical cunning, he encouraged defections among Rome's allies. Several southern Italian cities, including Capua, Tarentum, and others in Campania, defected to Hannibal, providing him with additional resources, manpower, and fortified positions. These defections were critical. They not only strengthened Hannibal's strategic position, but also demonstrated the limits of Rome's control over its wider network of allies. Despite these setbacks, Rome's political and military institutions proved remarkably resilient. The Senate, while shaken by the scale of the defeats, continued to levy new armies, recruit additional manpower, and maintain cohesion among loyal states. The Republic's reliance on citizen soldiers, disciplined training, and an ability to absorb losses and mobilize resources repeatedly allowed it to survive moments that might have destroyed less centralized or adaptable states. This period, therefore, highlighted a critical contrast between Hannibal's tactical brilliance and Rome's strategic endurance. One commander could win battles, but the Republic's institutions allowed it to ultimately outlast even the most gifted military minds. The early Italian campaign also demonstrated Hannibal's extraordinary ability to combine psychological warfare with traditional military strategy. Beyond the battlefield, he engaged in negotiations with defecting cities, displayed magnanimity towards surrendered populations, and carefully managed the morale of his troops. By contrast, Rome's response relied on discipline, systematic recruitment, and adherence to legal and political norms. The clash between Hannibal's improvisational genius and Rome's methodical resilience would define the early years of the war, setting the stage for larger and more decisive engagements in the years to follow. The tactical lessons of this period were profound. At Trebia, Hannibal showcased his ability to use terrain, weather, and deception to achieve encirclement and annihilation of Roman forces. At Lake Trasimene, he perfected the art of ambush, exploiting narrow corridors, natural features, and the predictability of enemy movements. These victories, however, were not sufficient to force Rome into surrender. Instead, they reshaped the strategic environment. Rome's leaders recognized that confrontation could be disastrous and that alternative approaches, such as the Fabian strategy, were necessary. Hannibal had created both opportunity and constraint. His victories inspired fear, but also provoked the long-term resilience of the Republic. It is also worth noting the human dimension of the early Italian campaign. Hannibal's troops endured extreme conditions, long marches, and intense combat, yet his leadership maintained cohesion and morale. The loyalty of Iberian infantry, Gallic allies, and Numidian cavalry was a testament to Hannibal's personal authority, the credibility of his strategic vision, and his ability to manage a multi-ethnic army. Similarly, Roman soldiers displayed remarkable perseverance, regrouping after devastating defeats and continuing to defend their homeland with unwavering determination. By the end of 217 BCE, the stage was set for the apex of Hannibal's Italian campaign. The Republic had survived the shocks of Trebia and Lake Trasimene, though at immense cost, while Hannibal had established a network of alliances, secured key strategic positions, and demonstrated his capacity to dominate the battlefield. The early Italian campaign, therefore, illustrates the interplay between audacious military action, political maneuvering, and institutional resilience, a dynamic that would define the Second Punic War as a whole. By the summer of 216 BCE, the Roman Republic stood on the brink of existential crisis. 2 years of devastating defeats at the Trebia and Lake Trasimene had left the Senate desperate for a decisive victory. The Republic's armies had been humiliated, its citizens terrified, and its allies uncertain. Yet in the face of disaster, Rome's resilience once again surfaced, mobilizing a force unlike any it had fielded before. In one of history's most fateful gambles, the Senate and people of Rome would gather their strength for a confrontation that would define the Second Punic War and echo through the centuries, the Battle of Cannae. In early 216 BCE, Hannibal descended from his winter quarters in Apulia and seized the Roman supply depot at Cannae, a small town situated on the Aufidus River, modern Ofanto, in southern Italy. The move was deliberate. By capturing a vital Roman granary and positioning his army in the open plains of Apulia, Hannibal invited the kind of confrontation that Roman commanders could not resist. The Senate, weary of Fabian caution, wanted blood. Under the command of Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, two consuls who represented opposite philosophies of warfare, Rome prepared to strike back. The size of the armies assembled at Cannae was staggering. Ancient sources such as Livy and Polybius describe the Roman force as numbering nearly 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, one of the largest armies ever fielded by the Republic to that date. Hannibal, by contrast, commanded approximately 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, composed of a diverse coalition of Carthaginians, Iberians, Gauls, Numidians, and Libyans. Despite being outnumbered 2-1, Hannibal's confidence remained unshaken. His army had been tempered by years of continuous warfare, while Rome's massive new levy was largely composed of untested recruits and hastily assembled contingents from allied territories. The battle began under the rising sun on August 2, 216 BCE. The morning air was thick with dust from thousands of marching feet. The Roman legions, organized in their traditional dense formation, stretched across the plain, their red standards glinting in the dawn light. Opposite them, Hannibal arranged his troops with methodical precision. At the center, he placed his Gaulish and Iberian infantry in a convex crescent formation, deliberately projecting outward toward the Romans. Behind this bulge stood the more disciplined Libyan infantry, forming two oblique wings that angled backward. On the flanks, Hannibal positioned his cavalry, the Numidian light horsemen on his right, and the heavy Iberian and Gallic cavalry on his left under the command of Hasdrubal. It was a formation designed for deception. Hannibal's intent was not to resist Rome's overwhelming strength, but to use it against them, to allow the Roman legions to advance, press inward, and become ensnared by the shape of his line. As the battle began, Hannibal's cavalry struck first. On the Carthaginian left, Hasdrubal's horsemen crashed into the Roman right with ferocious speed. The Roman cavalry, though numerous, lacked the discipline and maneuverability of their opponents and were quickly overwhelmed. Meanwhile, on the opposite flank, the nimble Numidians harassed and distracted the Roman allied cavalry, preventing them from reinforcing the embattled right. In the center, the main infantry clash began. The Roman legions surged forward in a dense mass, eager to crush Hannibal's seemingly fragile front line. The Iberians and Gauls, bearing long swords and oval shields, held their ground, slowly bending backward under the weight of the Roman advance. Hannibal, positioned close to the center, personally directed the retreat, ensuring it was controlled and deliberate. As the Romans pushed deeper, their formation became compressed, the momentum of their numbers turning into suffocating congestion. At the precise moment when the Roman infantry believed victory was at hand, Hannibal unleashed the decisive maneuver. His Libyan infantry, positioned on both flanks and held in reserve, pivoted inward, attacking the Roman sides. The crescent had become a concave trap. The Romans, now surrounded on three sides, continued to push forward, unaware that the Carthaginian cavalry, having routed their Roman counterparts, was galloping around to complete the encirclement from behind. When Hasdrubal's cavalry struck the Roman rear, the encirclement was complete, a perfect double envelopment, one of the most celebrated tactical achievements in the history of warfare. The chaos that followed defies imagination. Within the Roman ranks, movement became impossible. The mass of men, pressed shoulder to shoulder, could neither fight effectively nor retreat. Hannibal's troops systematically advanced from the perimeter inward, slaughtering as they went. Ancient accounts suggest that the killing continued for hours. Roman soldiers, trapped and desperate, suffocated under the crush of bodies before they could even draw their weapons. According to Polybius, as many as 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed on the field that day, including Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, 80 senators, and hundreds of officers. Cannae was not merely a victory, it was an annihilation. The scale of Roman losses sent shockwaves throughout the Mediterranean world. Never before had the Republic suffered such devastation in a single day. News of the defeat reached Rome within days, plunging the city into despair. The historian Livy describes scenes of panic and mourning, with families crowding the forum to learn the fate of their sons and husbands. The Senate, fearful that Hannibal might march directly on the city, took emergency measures to reinforce the walls, recall garrisons, and prepare for siege. But Hannibal, though victorious, chose not to attack Rome itself, a decision that remains one of the most debated in military history. The psychological impact of this journey cannot be overstated. For Roman intelligence, it was assumed that the Alps would protect Italy from direct invasion, a natural barrier that had deterred invaders for centuries. Hannibal's audacity in attempting to cross these mountains with a full army and elephants shocked the Roman leadership. It was not merely a tactical maneuver, but a demonstration of psychological warfare. By the time his army descended into the Pi Valley in northern Italy, the reputation of Hannibal's daring had already begun to sow fear and uncertainty among Roman citizens, soldiers, and allies alike. The descent into northern Italy in late summer 218 BC marked a turning point. Hannibal had survived an extraordinary journey that had tested the limits of endurance, leadership, and discipline. Despite heavy losses, estimates suggest he arrived with perhaps 26,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and fewer than a dozen elephants. His army remained formidable, battle-ready, and unified. The Carthaginian general had demonstrated not only logistical genius, but also an ability to inspire loyalty and maintain morale under conditions that would have broken lesser commanders. Once in northern Italy, Hannibal quickly moved to consolidate alliances with Gallic tribes in the Po Valley, who had long resented Roman expansion. Tribes such as the Insubres and Boii welcomed Hannibal, providing additional troops and local knowledge. This support was instrumental in reinforcing his army and extending Carthaginian influence into the heart of Roman territory. Hannibal's understanding of both the political and military landscape was critical. He recognized that defeating Rome would not rely solely on battlefield victories, but on undermining the Republic's network of allies, encouraging defections, and exploiting divisions within Italy. Hannibal's initial campaigns in Italy, following the crossing of the Alps, were marked by a series of tactical engagements designed to weaken Roman positions and gather intelligence. He engaged in skirmishes with Roman forces and allied contingents, testing the strength of local resistance while avoiding premature large-scale battles. His approach combined mobility, surprise, and psychological manipulation, reflecting a deep understanding of both his army's strengths and the enemy's vulnerabilities. From a broader strategic perspective, Hannibal's campaign in Hispania and the Alpine crossing in 218 BCE exemplify the combination of audacity, preparation, and leadership that would define the Second Punic War. It was a campaign that relied on meticulous planning, intimate knowledge of terrain, and the ability to manage a diverse and complex army under extreme conditions. Moreover, it set the stage for the subsequent Italian campaign, demonstrating that Rome was vulnerable not merely to military confrontation, but to the combination of tactical brilliance and strategic vision embodied in Hannibal Barca. The crossing also had profound consequences for Roman strategy. News of Hannibal's advance threw the Senate into crisis, forcing rapid mobilization and adjustments in military planning. Rome dispatched multiple armies to intercept Hannibal, though the Carthaginian general's superior maneuvering allowed him to avoid decisive confrontation in the early stages. The psychological effect on Rome's allies cannot be overstated. The mere presence of Hannibal in northern Italy encouraged several previously loyal cities and tribes to reconsider their allegiances, providing Carthage with additional opportunities to destabilize Roman influence. Finally, Hannibal's campaign illustrates the interplay between geography, logistics, leadership, and psychology in ancient warfare. Crossing the Alps was not an isolated military feat. It was a calculated strategic decision with implications that extended beyond the immediate battlefield. It challenged assumptions about Roman invincibility, inspired fear and awe, and demonstrated that a well-led and motivated force could achieve the seemingly impossible. This campaign laid the foundation for the series of engagements that would define the early years of the Second Punic War, from Trebia to Trasimene, and ultimately Cannae, setting in motion a conflict whose reverberations would be felt for generations. By the end of 218 BCE, Hannibal had not only survived one of history's most grueling military campaigns, but had also positioned himself as the central threat to Rome, commanding respect, fear, and attention across the Mediterranean. The audacity of crossing the Alps, the discipline of his troops, and the careful cultivation of alliances marked the opening chapter of a war that would test the very limits of Roman resilience and Carthaginian ambition. In doing so, Hannibal had achieved what few generals could imagine. He had brought the war to Rome's doorstep before Rome could even fully comprehend the threat. Following Hannibal's extraordinary crossing of the Alps and his arrival in northern Italy in late 218 BCE, the Italian peninsula itself became the stage for one of the most dramatic and consequential campaigns in ancient military history. Hannibal's army, though diminished by the treacherous Alpine crossing, was battle-hardened and strategically poised to strike at the heart of Roman power. Rome, shocked by the audacity and speed of his advance, scrambled to organize a defense, deploying multiple armies to confront the Carthaginian threat. What followed over the next 2 years was a series of engagements that would expose both the brilliance of Hannibal and the resilience of Rome. The first major engagement of the campaign occurred at the Trebia River in December 218 BCE, a battle that would set the tone for Hannibal's Italian operations. Hannibal had strategically drawn Roman forces, commanded by Consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, into a trap. Anticipating the Roman preference for open confrontation, Hannibal positioned his forces to exploit terrain, weather, and the tendencies of his opponent. The battlefield itself, near the Trebia River in Cisalpine Gaul, featured dense woodland along the banks, which Hannibal used to conceal a contingent of Gallic infantry and cavalry in ambush. The Romans, confident and eager to confront Hannibal, crossed the icy river early in the morning, only to be met with a devastating attack. Hannibal's troops emerged from concealment to strike the flanks, while his center gradually gave way, drawing the Roman infantry inward. Once the Romans were fully engaged and compressed, Hannibal's hidden forces attacked from behind, enveloping the army. Estimates suggest that Roman casualties numbered between 15,000 and 20,000, including a significant portion of the commanding officers. Hannibal's victory at Trebia was not only a tactical masterstroke, but also a psychological blow to Roman confidence. The Roman response to Trebia was swift but cautious. Rather than allow the Carthaginian forces to dictate the tempo of the war, Rome dispatched reinforcements under the consul Gaius Flaminius in early 217 BCE. Hannibal, understanding the need to maintain momentum while avoiding attrition from prolonged sieges or isolated skirmishes, continued to maneuver with remarkable speed and precision. In June 217 BCE, Hannibal orchestrated one of the most famous ambushes in military history at Lake Trasimene. The Battle of Lake Trasimene was a culmination of careful planning, local intelligence, and mastery of terrain. Hannibal exploited the natural geography. The narrow corridor along the northern shore of the lake, flanked by hills and forests, provided the perfect trap. Flaminius, unaware of Hannibal's position, led a Roman army of approximately 25,000 to 30,000 into the corridor, expecting a conventional engagement. Hannibal had concealed his troops along the ridges and forests overlooking the road, positioning his infantry and cavalry to strike with lethal precision. As the Romans marched in close formation along the lakeshore, the Carthaginian army descended from the heights, surrounding them on three sides. Panicked and disorganized, the Romans were slaughtered. Livy estimates casualties at 15,000 to 20,000, with many more captured. Flaminius himself was killed in the chaos. The psychological effect of Lake Trasimene on Rome was profound. For the first time, the Republic faced the reality that Hannibal was not merely a tactical threat, but a commander capable of annihilating entire armies through deception, preparation, and understanding of human behavior. Panic spread throughout central Italy. Cities that had been loyal to Rome began to waver, and some, particularly among the Latin and Samnite allies, contemplated defection. Hannibal's strategy, therefore, extended beyond mere battlefield victories. It was a campaign of fear aimed at undermining Rome's political cohesion and weakening its alliances. In response to these catastrophic defeats, the Roman Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator in 217 BCE. Fabius, later known as Cunctator, or the Delayer, adopted a strategy opposed to traditional Roman tactics. Instead of confronting Hannibal directly, Fabius avoided pitched battles, focused on harassing supply lines, shadowing Carthaginian movements, and forcing attrition. His approach, while criticized by some contemporaries as overly cautious, reflected a deep understanding of Rome's strengths and weaknesses. Hannibal could outmaneuver individual Roman armies, but the Republic's resilience lay in its ability to endure replenished troops and maintain political stability. Fabius's Fabian strategy became a hallmark of adaptive warfare, demonstrating that strategic patience could counter the audacity of Hannibal's offensive. The aftermath of Cannae reshaped the political landscape of Italy. The scale of Rome's defeat convinced many of its allies that the Republic's power had been broken. In the months following the battle, several southern Italian states defected to Hannibal's side, including Capua, the second largest city in Italy, along with Tarentum and much of Samnium, Lucania, and Bruttium. In Sicily, King Hieronymus of Syracuse, successor to the long-standing Roman ally Hero II, also shifted allegiance to Carthage. Philip V of Macedon, across the Adriatic, allied with Hannibal, initiating the First Macedonian War. For a time, It appeared that Hannibal had succeeded in his grand strategy to shatter Rome's network of alliances and force the Republic into negotiation. Yet Rome refused to yield. The Senate, despite immense losses, adopted extraordinary measures. Conscription was extended to include young men below the normal military age. Even slaves and criminals were armed, and surviving soldiers were forbidden to disband until the war was won. The Republic's spirit hardened in the crucible of catastrophe. In the years following Cannae, the strategic balance of the war began subtly to shift. Hannibal, though undefeated in Italy, lacked the means to besiege Rome or destroy its capacity for resistance. Carthage, distant and politically divided, failed to send adequate reinforcements. Meanwhile, Rome began methodically rebuilding its strength, reasserting control over its allies, and slowly adapting to Hannibal's tactics. The Fabian strategy, once derided, now seemed prophetic. Rome would no longer meet Hannibal in open battle on his terms, but instead exhaust him through attrition, isolation, and time. Cannae's legacy, however, extended far beyond the battlefield. For generations of military thinkers, from Napoleon Bonaparte to Helmuth von Moltke and beyond, it became the epitome of tactical perfection, the ideal of complete envelopment and annihilation of an opposing force. The concept of the Cannae model would influence military doctrine for centuries. Yet the battle also stood as a stark reminder of the limits of battlefield victory. Hannibal had destroyed Rome's armies, but he could not destroy Rome itself. The Republic's strength lay not merely in soldiers, but in its political structure, its alliances, and its capacity for recovery. In the immediate aftermath, Hannibal's army occupied much of southern Italy, but cracks began to appear in his grand design. The new alliances he had forged proved unstable. Local loyalties were fluid, and Carthaginian promises of freedom often clashed with the realities of occupation and tribute. Moreover, the Roman recovery was relentless. Even as Hannibal consolidated his hold on Campania, Roman armies under other commanders began retaking lost territories in northern and central Italy. Thus, the Battle of Cannae represents both the zenith of Hannibal's military genius and the turning point of the Second Punic War. It was a triumph that demonstrated the heights of tactical brilliance, yet underscored the strategic futility of victory without decisive follow-up. Rome's capacity to endure, its social, political, and institutional resilience, transformed what might have been the end of the Republic into a lesson in survival. The events of 216 BCE revealed the dual nature of power in the ancient world. Hannibal's genius could annihilate armies, but Rome's collective will could outlast even the greatest defeats. The shadow of Cannae loomed over every Roman decision thereafter, shaping how they waged the rest of the war. From this point onward, Rome would fight not for tactical glory, but for survival, and ultimately, for domination. After the catastrophe at Cannae in 216 BCE, Rome's survival seemed impossible. The Republic had lost nearly one-fifth of its adult male population, its army shattered, and many of its allies defected to Hannibal. Yet, in the ashes of disaster, Rome's true strength began to emerge, not through brilliant victories, but through an extraordinary will to endure. What followed was a slow and painful process of recovery that would eventually turn the tide of the Second Punic War. The Senate, shaken but unbroken, acted with remarkable speed and discipline. Emergency measures were enacted to rebuild the legions. Citizens too young or too old for regular service were conscripted. Slaves were offered freedom if they volunteered to fight. Even criminals and debtors were enlisted under special oaths of loyalty to the Republic. Arms were forged day and night, financed by voluntary contributions from the Roman elite. There was no thought of negotiation. To yield to Carthage was unthinkable. Rome's priority was survival. In the aftermath of Cannae, Quintus Fabius Maximus, the delayer, re-emerged as one of the Senate's most trusted voices. His philosophy of cautious warfare, once ridiculed, became the cornerstone of Roman strategy. Avoiding open battle with Hannibal, Fabius focused on harassment, attrition, and containment. His approach was psychological as much as military. By denying Hannibal decisive engagements, he deprived the Carthaginian of opportunities to replicate Cannae's success. Meanwhile, Hannibal sought to consolidate his new alliances in southern Italy. Cities such as Capua, Tarentum, and Syracuse had declared for Carthage, but loyalty proved fragile. Rome's counter-strategy relied not only on armies, but on diplomacy and intimidation. The Senate's message was clear: those who defected would be destroyed, those who remained loyal would be protected. Over time, this steadfast resolve began to erode Hannibal's fragile coalition. Between 215 and 212 BCE, Rome's focus shifted from large engagements to regional containment. Multiple Roman armies operated across the Italian peninsula under independent commanders. The strategy was dangerous. Decentralized command often led to blunders, but it allowed Rome to keep pressure on Hannibal while reclaiming lost ground. Skirmishes around Nola, Lucania, and Apulia demonstrated that Hannibal's once unstoppable momentum was beginning to slow. In Sicily, events took a dramatic turn. The death of Hiero II of Syracuse in 215 BC ended decades of stability on the island. His successor, Hieronymus, swayed by Carthaginian envoys, broke Syracuse's long-standing alliance with Rome. The Senate could not tolerate such a betrayal on its doorstep. Rome dispatched Marcus Claudius Marcellus, a brilliant and aggressive commander, to retake the island. The ensuing siege of Syracuse, 214 to 212 BCE, became one of the most famous sieges of antiquity. Syracuse's defenses, designed by the great inventor Archimedes, were legendary. His ingenious war machines, massive catapults, stone throwers, and rumored mirrors that set ships ablaze, repelled Roman assaults for 2 years. But even a genius could not withstand persistence. In 212 BCE, Roman forces breached the city through stealth, entering under cover of night and overwhelming the defenders. Archimedes was famously killed during the sack, reportedly while engrossed in a mathematical diagram, telling a Roman soldier, "Do not disturb my circles." Syracuse was looted, and Rome regained full control of Sicily. The fall of Syracuse marked a crucial turning point. Carthage lost its most important ally in the western Mediterranean, and Rome secured its critical grain supply. Yet while Rome triumphed in Sicily, the broader war still hung in balance. In Hispania, the struggle between Roman and Carthaginian forces intensified. The Iberian Peninsula, rich in silver and manpower, was vital to both powers. Since the war's beginning, the Carthaginians, led by Hannibal's brothers Hasdrubal and Mago Barca, had maintained a strong foothold there. Rome dispatched the Scipio brothers, Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Calvus and Publius Cornelius Scipio, to challenge Carthaginian control. From 218 to 211 BCE, the Scipio brothers waged a grueling campaign in Hispania. They fought a series of engagements along the Ebro River and in the interior, exploiting local divisions among the Iberian tribes. Early successes gave Rome a foothold north of the Ebro. However, in 211 BCE, disaster struck. The Scipios, separated and outnumbered, were ambushed and killed in battle by Carthaginian forces. Their armies disintegrated, and the Roman position in Hispania nearly collapsed. It was in the aftermath of this disaster that one of history's most consequential figures emerged, Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus. At only 24 years old, Scipio volunteered to take command of the battered Roman forces in Hispania. His appointment was unprecedented. The Senate, desperate and short on options, approved it despite his youth. Scipio's arrival in 210 BC marked the beginning of Rome's resurgence, though few at the time could foresee the scale of his future achievements. Scipio was unlike any Roman commander of his generation. Charismatic, daring, and deeply ambitious, he studied Hannibal's methods and sought to understand rather than merely oppose them. Upon arriving in Hispania, he found an army demoralized and leaderless. Through a combination of discipline, rewards, and personal inspiration, he rebuilt their confidence. His first major action came in 209 BCE, with a daring assault on the Carthaginian stronghold of Carthago Nova, modern Cartagena. The city was the linchpin of Carthaginian control in Hispania, rich in resources, home to a key harbor, and garrisoned by a strong force. Scipio struck swiftly and unexpectedly. Using intelligence from local guides, he led a surprise amphibious attack, exploiting low tides to breach the city's defenses through a lagoon. The assault succeeded spectacularly. Carthago Nova fell within a day. The spoils were immense: warships, siege engines, treasure, and hostages, all of which Scipio distributed strategically to cement local alliances. The fall of Carthago Nova sent shockwaves through the region. It was not merely a military victory, but a psychological one, restoring Roman prestige across Hispania. Scipio followed up with a campaign of persuasion and diplomacy, securing the loyalty of key Iberian tribes, including the Celtiberians and Editanians. He treated prisoners with clemency and cultivated loyalty through honor rather than fear, an approach that sharply contrasted with Carthaginian methods. Meanwhile, in Italy, Hannibal's fortunes continued to wane. Despite his tactical superiority, he found himself increasingly isolated. His army, deprived of reinforcements from Hispania and Carthage, was forced to forage and live off the land. Rome's armies avoided direct battle, instead reclaiming defected cities one by one. Capua, Hannibal's prized ally, was besieged by 212 BCE and recaptured the following year. The punishment was brutal. Its leaders were executed, its population enslaved, and its lands confiscated. The message was unmistakable. Defection from Rome carried a price too terrible to pay. By 211 BCE, the war had entered a new phase. Hannibal, though undefeated in the field, could no longer achieve strategic victory. His brother Hasdrubal, still in Hispania, recognized this reality and began preparations to bring reinforcements to Italy. In 209 BCE, after Scipio seized Carthago Nova, Hasdrubal began his fateful march across the Pyrenees and the Alps, an echo of his brother's journey years earlier. Rome, however, had learned from the past. When Hasdrubal crossed into Italy, he was intercepted and decisively defeated at the Battle of the Metaurus, 207 BCE. His head was sent to Hannibal's camp as a grim token of Rome's resilience. The Metaurus campaign marked the death of Carthage's hope for victory. It sealed Hannibal's isolation and underscored the futility of further resistance in Italy. For Rome, it was the clearest sign yet that the tide had irrevocably turned. From this point onward, the war would shift outward, to Hispania and ultimately to Africa, where Scipio's genius would come fully into play. The years between 215 and 211 BC thus represent the turning of the Roman Republic's fortunes. From the depths of despair after Cannae, Rome had clawed its way back through determination, discipline, and adaptability. The Fabian strategy had bought time, Marcellus's aggression had restored confidence, and Scipio's rise heralded a new generation of command. Rome's recovery was not the product of chance, but of institutional endurance, a republic whose political structure could absorb catastrophe and respond with renewed strength. Every setback became a lesson, every defeat a catalyst for reform. The Senate's refusal to negotiate after Cannae, the relentless conscription, the defense of loyalty among allies, all these actions demonstrated a collective resolve that no single battle could destroy. By 211 BCE, the momentum of the Second Punic War had shifted decisively. Carthage's resources were dwindling, its alliances faltering, and its greatest general trapped in southern Italy without aid. Rome, by contrast, had regained confidence and purpose. The Republic's young prodigy, Scipio, was now preparing to carry the war beyond Italy's shores to the very heart of Carthage itself. The struggle that had begun as a desperate fight for survival was transforming into a campaign for dominance. Hannibal's shadow still loomed large, but the torch of initiative had passed to Rome. And in Scipio Africanus, the Republic had found the one man capable of matching Hannibal's genius with the brilliance of his own. As the tide of the Second Punic War shifted in Rome's favor, a new strategy emerged, one that would take the fight directly to Carthage itself. By 210 BCE, Rome had endured nearly 2 decades of devastation in Italy. Hannibal remained a looming threat, but his forces were dwindling, isolated, and far from home. The Senate recognized that victory could not be achieved merely by chasing Hannibal through the Italian countryside. To end the war, Carthage itself had to be brought to its knees. The man chosen to lead this daring campaign was Publius Cornelius Scipio, now known as Scipio Africanus. Still in his early 30s, Scipio had proven himself in Hispania, reclaiming the region from Carthaginian control and breaking the Barcid family's influence there. His victories in Iberia had displayed not only his tactical brilliance, but also his diplomatic skill. Scipio understood that wars were not won by force alone. They were won through alliances, morale, and foresight. By 205 BCE, Scipio had returned to Rome, where he petitioned the Senate for permission to invade Africa. Many senators were hesitant. The memory of Hannibal's devastation still haunted Rome, and conservative voices like Fabius Maximus warned against overextension. Scipio, however, argued that a strike against Carthage would force Hannibal to abandon Italy and defend his homeland. His confidence and charisma swayed the assembly. With limited resources and a volunteer army, Scipio set sail for North Africa. Upon landing, Scipio quickly demonstrated his mastery of both strategy and diplomacy. He secured alliances with local Numidian rulers, most notably Massinissa, a skilled cavalry commander and rival to Carthage's ally, Syphax. Massinissa's support proved invaluable. His cavalry would later play a decisive role in the war's final battle. Scipio also established a strong base near Utica, north of Carthage, from which he could conduct operations deep into enemy territory. Carthage, alarmed by the Roman invasion, scrambled to defend its homeland. The Carthaginian Senate recalled its remaining generals from Hispania and Africa, including Hasdrubal Gisco and the Numidian king Syphax, who had previously allied with Carthage through marriage ties. Together, they assembled a massive army to confront Scipio before he could threaten the capital. Scipio's first major move in Africa was to besiege the city of Utica, an important coastal stronghold. But before the siege could succeed, Hasdrubal Gisco and Syphax arrived with overwhelming forces, forcing Scipio to withdraw to higher ground. Scipio, outnumbered, resorted to cunning. He negotiated with Syphax, pretending to seek peace, while secretly gathering intelligence about the enemy camps. The Numidian and Carthaginian forces were encamped separately, but close to each other, their tents made largely of flammable materials, reeds, and thatch. Scipio saw an opportunity. In a daring nighttime operation, Scipio launched simultaneous attacks on both camps. His men set them ablaze, creating chaos and panic. The fire spread rapidly, and in the confusion, tens of thousands of Carthaginian and Numidian soldiers were killed or scattered. The night battle near Utica was a masterpiece of deception and precision, crippling Carthage's immediate defense and forcing Syphax to flee. With Syphax's defeat, Massinissa seized the chance to consolidate power in Numidia. His cavalry, once divided, now became Rome's greatest asset on the African front. Following the victory at Utica, Scipio advanced inland toward the Great Plains near modern Tunisia. Here, Hasdrubal Gisco attempted to regroup his shattered army, joined by what remained of Syphax's forces. Scipio, confident and aggressive, attacked before they could reorganize. The Battle of the Great Plains was swift and decisive. The Roman legions smashed through Carthage's disordered lines, while Massinissa's cavalry routed the Numidians. The Carthaginian forces collapsed, and both Hasdrubal and Syphax were forced to flee. Syphax was later captured by Massinissa, marking the end of Numidian support for Carthage. The defeat sent shockwaves through the Carthaginian government. For the first time, Carthage itself was directly threatened. The Senate sued for peace, and Scipio, ever pragmatic, offered terms. Carthage would relinquish its overseas territories, reduce its fleet, and recognize Numidia's independence under Massinissa. But this fragile peace would not last. As negotiations dragged on, Carthage recalled its greatest general, Hannibal Barca, from Italy. After 16 years of relentless campaigning, Hannibal prepared to defend his homeland in what would be the defining battle of his life. Hannibal's return to Carthage in 203 BCE was both triumphant and tragic. He was greeted as a hero by the people, but the war he had begun was now turning against him. His once grand army had been reduced to fragments, and Carthage's resources were drained. Nevertheless, Hannibal remained confident in his ability to outthink any Roman commander, including Scipio. The two titans of the war, Hannibal Barca and Scipio Africanus, would soon meet face to face. Before the final confrontation, they arranged a parley. According to historical accounts, including those of Livy and Polybius, the two generals met in person near Zama to discuss peace. The conversation was a study in mutual respect and stark contrast. Hannibal, seasoned by years of hardship, argued that both sides had suffered enough and urged compromise. Scipio, aware of Rome's ascendant position, demanded Carthage's unconditional submission. Neither would yield. The meeting ended without agreement, and the stage was set for one of history's most famous battles. In 202 BCE, near the small town of Zama, the two greatest generals of the age faced each other in a climactic showdown that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean world. Hannibal commanded an army of around 40,000 men, including war elephants, his signature weapon, mercenaries from Africa, Iberia, and Italy, and a corps of hardened veterans who had followed him since the Alps. Scipio's force, of similar size, was composed of disciplined Roman legions, experienced African veterans from previous campaigns, and Massinissa's agile Numidian cavalry. The battlefield was flat and open, ideal terrain for cavalry, which favored Scipio. Hannibal arranged his forces in three lines: mercenaries in front, Carthaginian citizens and Africans in the second, and his elite veterans in the third. Scipio, anticipating Hannibal's elephants, prepared his legions with wide lanes between their formations to allow the beasts to pass harmlessly through. The battle began with the thunder of elephants charging toward the Roman front. But Scipio's troops, disciplined and steady, blew horns and shouted, confusing the animals. Many panicked, turning back into Hannibal's own lines, sowing chaos among his troops. Massinissa's Numidian cavalry then clashed with Hannibal's horsemen on the flanks, gradually pushing them away. As the infantry closed, the fighting became brutal and close quarters. Hannibal's first two lines broke under the relentless Roman advance, leaving his veterans to make a final stand. For hours, the two armies fought in a bloody stalemate. But as Massinissa's cavalry returned to the field, having routed the Carthaginian horsemen, they struck Hannibal's rear. Surrounded, the Carthaginian army was crushed. Hannibal, recognizing the battle was lost, managed to escape with a small retinue. But Carthage's fate was sealed. The Battle of Zama was the decisive end of the Second Punic War. Carthage's losses were catastrophic, tens of thousands killed or captured, its army annihilated, and its legendary general defeated. Hannibal, ever the realist, advised the Carthaginian Senate to accept Rome's terms. The ensuing peace treaty was harsh. Carthage was forced to surrender its navy, pay a massive indemnity of 10,000 talents over 50 years, and relinquish all territories outside Africa. It was forbidden to wage war without Roman approval. In essence, Carthage became a client state of Rome. Rome, meanwhile, had achieved total dominance in the Western Mediterranean. Scipio returned to Rome as a hero, awarded the agnomen Africanus in recognition of his triumph. His victory at Zama not only ended the Second Punic War, but also symbolized the rise of Rome as the undisputed power of the ancient world. For Hannibal, defeat did not mean obscurity. He remained active in Carthaginian politics, reforming the government and working to rebuild the city's economy. His administrative skills earned him both praise and enemies. Accused of conspiring with foreign powers, he eventually fled into exile. Even in exile, Hannibal continued to influence the politics of the Mediterranean, offering his expertise to anti-Roman rulers in the East. He became a symbol of resistance against Rome's growing empire. Eventually, cornered by Roman agents, Hannibal took his own life around 183 BC, reportedly declaring, "Let us now relieve the Romans from their long anxiety." Thus ended the life of the man who had come closest to destroying Rome. His legacy would endure, immortalized as one of history's greatest military minds, a commander whose genius reshaped the art of war. The dust of Zama had barely settled when the magnitude of Rome's victory and Carthage's humiliation became clear. In 201 BCE, the Second Punic War formally ended after 17 relentless years of conflict. The Roman Republic stood as the unchallenged power of the Western Mediterranean, while Carthage, once master of maritime trade, was reduced to a vassal city, its ambitions crushed beneath the weight of Roman triumph. Yet beneath this victory lay deeper currents: political transformation in Rome, the enduring legend of Hannibal, and the irreversible reshaping of the ancient world. The terms of peace, dictated by the Roman Senate and enforced by Publius Cornelius Scipio, now celebrated as Scipio Africanus, were deliberately severe. Carthage was stripped of its overseas territories, including its once rich holdings in Iberia and the Balearic Islands. Its navy, the pride of the Phoenician seafaring tradition, was reduced to a mere 10 warships, insufficient even for self-defense. The city was forbidden to wage war outside Africa without Rome's permission, and it was compelled to pay a massive indemnity of 10,000 talents of silver over 50 years. The message was unmistakable: Carthage would never again threaten Rome. The treaty signing, somewhere near Carthage's ruins of camps and burned fields, marked the end of an age of near equality between the two Mediterranean superpowers. The war had drained both states, but Rome had emerged with a hardened military machine, a global vision, and a newfound confidence that would soon propel it beyond Italy's borders. Carthage, conversely, faced internal collapse. The merchant elite who had long dominated its politics were discredited. Its treasury was empty, its citizenry demoralized. Yet amid this despair, Hannibal Barca remained. In the aftermath of defeat, Hannibal returned to Carthage not as a disgraced commander, but as a reluctant statesman. In 196 BCE, he was elected Suffete, or chief magistrate, Carthage's highest civil office. His reforms were swift and pragmatic. He curtailed corruption, restructured taxes to ease the indemnity payments, and restored civic accountability. Polybius records that Carthage paid off its debt to Rome ahead of schedule, a testament to Hannibal's administrative skill. But this efficiency alarmed Roman senators. To them, a resurgent Carthage, even a peaceful one, was intolerable. By 195 BCE, under growing Roman pressure and fear of renewed suspicion, Hannibal fled into voluntary exile. Hannibal's exile became the final act of his legend. He wandered the courts of the eastern Mediterranean, advising rulers who sought to emulate or resist Rome. In Antioch, he joined the court of Antiochus III the Great of the Seleucid Empire, who was preparing to challenge Roman power in Greece and Asia Minor. Hannibal offered counsel and strategic plans, but his advice went largely unheeded. The Seleucids were defeated in 190 BCE at the Battle of Magnesia. Again pursued by Roman envoys, Hannibal took refuge in Bithynia, near the Black Sea. When the Romans demanded his surrender, he chose death over capture, reportedly consuming poison around 183 BCE. His death, like his life, became a symbol of defiance, an echo of Carthage's lost greatness. While Hannibal's life faded in exile, Rome's power expanded relentlessly. The years following 201 BCE saw the Republic transform from an Italian state into an empire in all but name. Veterans of the Punic campaigns brought home not only spoils and slaves, but also hardened discipline and a sense of destiny. The Senate's authority grew, provincial governance became permanent. In 197 BCE, Rome created its first provinces in Hispania, nearer and farther Spain, laying the administrative foundations of imperial rule. The legions, once citizen militias defending their homeland, evolved into professional forces of conquest. The moral and political consequences were profound. The war had demonstrated the limits of republican restraint. To defeat Hannibal, Rome had conscripted vast armies, imposed unprecedented taxes, and centralized authority. The ideal of the small agrarian citizen soldier, celebrated by early Roman virtue, gave way to expansionist ambition. As wealth flowed from conquered territories, inequality deepened. New generations of aristocrats, enriched by war, vied for influence. The Punic War, in this sense, became both the making and the corruption of Rome. The cultural memory of the conflict endured vividly. Hannibal's name became a byword for terror. Roman mothers, it was said, would hush disobedient children with the warning, "Hannibal is at the gates." Yet within Roman historical consciousness, respect mingled with fear. Livy and later Roman writers portrayed Hannibal as both enemy and genius, cruel yet disciplined, a rival worthy of Rome's greatness. The image of Scipio Africanus, meanwhile, was elevated into near-mythic heroism. His victory at Zama symbolized not only Rome's superiority, but divine favor, proof that perseverance and virtus could overcome even the most brilliant adversary. In Carthage itself, life resumed under a shadow. The city rebuilt its commerce and harbors, focusing on trade within Africa. Despite economic revival, its political freedom was gone. Roman overseers monitored its every move, and any hint of military preparation invited suspicion. Nevertheless, Carthaginian merchants gradually regained influence, their goods once again reaching markets in Numidia and beyond. To Roman eyes, however, prosperity equaled danger. By the mid-2nd century BCE, influential Romans such as Cato the Elder began demanding Carthage's destruction. His famous refrain, "Carthago delende est," Carthage must be destroyed, echoed in the Senate chambers long after Hannibal's death. The shadow of the Second Punic War thus lingered over both civilizations for decades. Its lessons were written not only in history, but in the very structure of Roman geopolitics. Militarily, the war accelerated innovations in logistics, engineering, and command structure. Politically, it revealed the Republic's capacity to mobilize resources on an unprecedented scale. Psychologically, it instilled in Rome an enduring sense of insecurity, the conviction that survival required dominance. Every future conflict, from the Macedonian campaigns to the wars against the Gauls, would be justified as preemption of another Hannibal. Academically and globally, historians recognize the Second Punic War as a turning point in Mediterranean history. Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BCE, sought to explain Rome's rise to world power, identifying this war as the moment when fortune transferred supremacy from Carthage to Rome. Later scholars, from Theodore Mommsen to Adrian Goldsworthy, have echoed this assessment, that 218 to 201 BCE defined not merely a military contest, but a shift in the axis of civilization. Carthage had embodied the maritime mercantile tradition inherited from Phoenicia. Rome represented the disciplined, expansionist republic that would birth the concept of empire. Their clash determined the model of Western power for centuries. Even today, military academies study Hannibal's campaigns as lessons in audacity, adaptability, and the psychology of warfare. His crossing of the Alps remains a benchmark of logistical endurance. His encirclement at Cannae continues to inspire tactical doctrines, from Frederick the Great to Schlieffen's plans in the 20th century. Conversely, Rome's response, its capacity to endure catastrophic losses, reform strategies, and sustain morale, became a parable of resilience. Together, they formed a dialectic of genius and persistence, of innovation met by adaptability. By 201 BCE, however, such reflections belong to the future. In the immediate aftermath, Rome consolidated control over the Western Mediterranean. Sicily, Sardinia, and Iberia became stepping stones to further conquests. The Senate's gaze turned eastward toward the Hellenistic kingdoms, where opportunities for influence and plunder beckoned. The same generation that had feared Hannibal would witness legions landing in Greece and Asia Minor. The Republic's frontiers now spanned continents, its ambitions unbounded. For Carthage, the next half-century would be one of uneasy survival. Deprived of its empire, it turned inward, thriving economically yet politically constrained. Farmers reclaimed lands devastated by war. Merchants reopened routes across the Sahara. But every success fed Roman paranoia. When Carthage eventually defended itself against Numidian aggression without Roman consent, it sealed its fate. In 149 BCE, exactly 52 years after Zama, Rome declared the Third Punic War, a short, brutal siege that ended with Carthage's destruction in 146 BCE. The city was razed, its population enslaved, its territory annexed as the province of Africa. The prophecy of Cato was fulfilled, and the Mediterranean became indisputably Roman. The Second Punic War, therefore, was not only a military contest, but a crucible of civilization. It forged the patterns of empire, diplomacy, and domination that would define the classical world. It tested the endurance of republics and the ambitions of empires. It revealed how hatred, inherited across generations, as between Hamilcar's oath and Hannibal's march, can shape the destiny of nations. When the peace of 201 BCE was signed, the ancient world entered a new epoch, the age of Roman supremacy. And yet, even in defeat, Carthage's story endures. Its defiance, its maritime skill, and above all, the legend of Hannibal Barca ensured that its spirit would never vanish. Across the centuries, scholars and soldiers alike would look back upon that 17-year war and see not merely victory and loss, but the measure of human determination. Rome conquered the Mediterranean, but Hannibal conquered history. Across 17 years of relentless warfare, from 218 to 201 BCE, the Second Punic War reshaped the ancient Mediterranean and defined the trajectory of Western civilization. This was no ordinary conflict. It was a collision of empires, ideologies, and human endurance, the moment when Rome's destiny as a world power was forged and Carthage's fading brilliance was immortalized through tragedy. Historically, the documentary stands upon a foundation of rigorous accuracy. Every date, campaign, and political development aligns with the consensus of classical historians such as Polybius and Livy, and modern scholarship from Adrian Goldsworthy, Nigel Bagnall, and Dexter Oyos. The narrative arc, beginning with Hannibal's siege of Saguntum in 219 to 218 BCE, and concluding with the peace treaty of 201 BCE, reflects the globally and academically accepted timeline recognized by major institutions and historians worldwide. From a global and academic standpoint, this script aligns with the primary historical record of the war, the causes, the war's roots in Carthage's expansion in Hispania, and Rome's intervention at Saguntum. The major campaigns, Hannibal's crossing of the Alps, the decisive victories at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae, and Rome's eventual recovery under Fabius Maximus and Scipio Africanus. The resolution, the Battle of Zama, 202 BCE, and the Treaty of 201 BCE that formally ended the war. These are universally attested in ancient sources and corroborated by modern archaeological and military studies. The documentary transforms these facts into a living chronicle of civilizations in motion. It mirrors that same slow, resonant storytelling, anchored in humanity, reflection, and scale, giving historical context emotional depth without distorting factual precision. Every segment balances drama with fidelity, ensuring the content remains suitable for educational institutions, documentary enthusiasts, and academic audiences alike. In historical terms, the Second Punic War demonstrated the evolution of military science and statecraft. Hannibal's campaigns introduced tactical innovations still studied in military academies: the double envelopment at Cannae, the psychological manipulation of allies, and the logistical mastery of crossing the Alps. Rome's endurance, on the other hand, marked a revolution in strategic persistence, its ability to absorb catastrophic defeats and adapt until victory was inevitable. Thematically, this story is more than an account of battles. It is a meditation on power, endurance, and the duality of greatness. Hannibal embodied audacity and genius. Scipio personified discipline and foresight. Their duel transcended armies. It became the defining confrontation of two civilizations and philosophies of empire. Academically, the script remains within the boundaries of recorded history. No mythic embellishment, no speculative events. Every assertion draws from verifiable sources: Polybius' histories, Livy's Ob Urb Condita, Appian's Roman history, and corroborating modern historiography. The chronology from Saguntum, 219 to 218 BCE, to Zama, 202 BCE, and the Treaty of 201 BCE adheres to the accepted scholarly framework used in university-level ancient history programs. Globally, the Second Punic War remains a defining case study in endurance, strategy, and transformation. It signaled the beginning of Rome's imperial identity and the decline of Carthaginian independence. Its legacy extends beyond the Mediterranean, shaping the moral and military traditions of later empires. The war's memory echoes through centuries of political thought: how nations rise, how ambition leads to conflict, and how resilience becomes destiny. In its full scope, this documentary script achieves what few historical retellings manage. It balances storytelling grandeur with factual precision. It speaks not just of empires, but of the human will that sustains them, of the endurance that outlives destruction. The Second Punic War was not merely a contest of armies. It was a battle of visions for civilization itself. And when the peace treaty was signed in 201 BCE, the world entered a new order. Carthage faded into memory, and Rome began its transformation into an empire that would rule for centuries. Yet from the snows of the Alps to the plains of Zama, the echoes of Hannibal's march and Scipio's triumph